have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bold Moves podcast. I'm the host, Mandy Bryce, and I'm super excited to share with you a brand new episode with Miss Kenzie Bond. One of my favorite moments is when she said, I was so excited to get into my dream prison. I think that's enough intro. I hope you love it as much as I do. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the Bold Moves podcast. I am here with Kenzie Bond today. Hello, Kenzie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm super excited to hear your story and share it with my audience. The show is called Bold Moves, as I just said. So you've obviously made some, or you wouldn't be sitting here chatting with me today. Why don't you please share your story with us and let me know some of those risks you've taken and how you survived them and how they've impacted your life.
Sure. And thinking back, I've probably definitely taken more than one. I tend to kind of go big or go home and kind of, kind of stall, I guess, and maybe not even take some small moves that I should, and then just get tired and make this huge leap. But I think the biggest bold move that I can think of so far in my life, when I went to college, graduated high school around 97, 98, and I had, through a series of events, decided that I wanted to enter the criminal justice field. At the time, I really wanted to be like a juvenile probation officer, work with troubled youth, and it kind of fluctuate every now and again. But I knew definitely I wanted to work in the criminal justice field, and so I ended up going to a state university here in Texas that's pretty well known for its criminal justice program. Went through college. Actually began working full time for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So this is the state, prison agency here in Texas, and worked full time there while I worked my way through college for a number of things. A, for full time income, because I couldn't live the broke college life, and B, what good experience, no matter what I wanted to do in the criminal justice field, that was definitely a springboard. And somewhere along the way, I graduated college, and I actually, at a very young age, I think I was 23, got promoted to the position of sergeant, which is just kind of your first rank, kind of a staff supervisor, but pretty unheard of for such a young female with only about 3 years full-time experience to get promoted. Mind you, I'm working on all male facilities where I was at. There's no female facilities. And really decided that that's kind of what I wanted to do with my life. I had aspirations at the time of continuing to climb the ranks and hopefully becoming a unit warden by the time I was 30. Now, those 30s long past by now. This was almost 20 years ago. So continued to work, and I actually started working on my master's in criminal justice. I got promoted again pretty quickly, about a year and a half later, to the position of lieutenant on a much larger unit. It's actually where old death row is housed here in Texas. And I had wanted to work there for a long time. It was almost like my dream unit, dream prison, if that makes any sense.
It's not something that sounds familiar, but I guess I know what you mean given your story. I don't think most people have a dream prison, but that's a bold move in itself, I guess.
I guess so. And I really did. It was my life. And so something else that I have to mention is once you receive the rank of lieutenant, which is shift supervisor, with the housing or with the job comes the benefit of housing. But it's actually housing on the unit. I mean, it's like red brick, like the unit, and your neighbor is like, your colleague or your boss. It's all very strange, but it really is a good financial benefit if you play it out correctly. So got the promotion. At the time was living on the unit. Some things that happened on the unit that I was working at, and the warden that had promoted me, he actually got promoted somewhere else in a region down south, and had told me that he wanted me to come down there. So I eventually did move down there, which is probably a bold move in and of itself. I moved about 2 hours away. I didn't know anyone, and I was actually leaving a relationship at the time. It was kind of a relationship where we'd break up and get back together. And I knew that I had to put some geographical space between us, or this was just going to go on forever. But I couldn't imagine us living in the same town and being broken up. It was very strange. So moved down there. I worked there about a year. Now you have to remember this. I just moved to this random place, really just to take this job. And I was kind of getting, I don't think I want to use the word bitter yet. I was just really starting to realize some fundamental problems with the way the agency handles or treated its employees. So PDC is the largest state agency in Texas. So as you can imagine, it's a huge bureaucracy. And something that I had noticed along the way was anytime, something happened, the way that the system was set up, it was always kind of looking to place the blame somewhere. Blame had to be placed somewhere. It's never, and we're talking about security here. I mean, we're talking about public safety and security. So I definitely understand that. But when something happens, it's not just an opportunity for growth. You have to kind of place the blame somewhere and take care of the problem. And a lot of times that could end up in people being fired. And I got kind of disenchanted with that as I moved on. And about a year and a half into my new unit, something had happened. Well, me and one of the lieutenants was out. So there was 3 of us covering 24 hours, and me and another guy were working about 12, 16 hours a day, trying to cover. And we were just working very hard. I was working first shift at the time. And something had happened later that night after I'd left. They had a riot or something. I can't even remember. It's been so long ago. I think it was in the dorm. And anytime a large scale event like that happens, they put the unit on lockdown, and kind of the upper administration, the upper rank starts interviewing all the offenders, all the inmates, kind of determine what happened. And one of the inmates made a comment that, well, we were going to do it earlier, in the chow hall, like at dinner time. But Lieutenant Bond was there, so we didn't do it. And the warden was like, well, why? Because she was there. Did you not have this riot? He was like, oh, she'll, and this is like some slang here.
Yeah.
He was like, she'll light you up. She'll put some gas in your life. And what they mean is like chemical agents.
Okay.
It's the larger unit that I had been at. We used them pretty frequently, and I was used to kind of big disturbances. And he was like, okay. So I get into work the next day, and I'm being moved to the second shift, like the 2 to 10 shift, because this is where all the problems were happening.
Sure.
And I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. At the time I had seniority. I had been in this position the longest. So I had like the good shift, the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift, which is
Get
the good
it over
shift.
with, and you have the evening to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the coveted shift. And I was just so upset. And the warden was like, we've been having all these problems on this shift. And when I have a huge riot and then an inmate tell me that, they didn't do it earlier because, you were there. And that tells me that I need to put you where we're having the problems. And I was like, no. And
You shouldn't be punished for doing a good job.
It was like the veil lifted immediately. And, like I was telling you, I had already become disenchanted. But that was just it. So I remember going home. It was, I can't remember what time of year it was, but there was some kind of family function, and I'd gone home and I was talking to my mom, and I was always complaining about my job. I mean, it was just something that I was always doing. And I remember so clearly, I was complaining. And my mom just turned around and looked at me, and she's the best mother. She's so super supportive, but she was like, Kenzie, I'm tired of hearing you complain about your job. Either quit or shut up. And I was just like,
tough love.
Yes. But I was just like, oh. And she was like, it's not going to change. The job is what it is. The agency is what it is. And the whole ride home, so I was living about 2.5, 3 hours away. I just kept thinking about it. And I was just thinking. And I knew that I couldn't do it anymore. I was not going to second shift. Now, I was 28 years old at the time. So I had a college degree in criminal justice. I had started my master's. I had 10 years in with the state. And I lived there. I mean, I lived on the property. And I just drove home. And I remember telling one of my friends, I don't think I can do this anymore. And she said, well, have you sat down and really, kind of figured out how much you need each month? And that kind of triggered something in me like, I can do this. I mean, I think I can quit. And so I still got up the next morning and I got dressed and I went into work, and it was early. I was still on the day shift, and I did my shift briefing and I went down, and I was just like, no. And the new schedules had been put in our box, and they had me moving like that week to the next shift. And I said, nope. And I called my supervisor, and she's a wonderful woman. She was a captain, and she'd been working for the state for 36 years.
Wow.
And at the time I was 28 years old, and I said, I need you to come in because I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. And she got dressed. She came in, she looked at me and she said, you go and you do not come back. I mean, it was just very supportive.
I love it.
And I just walked out, and it was about 7:30 in the morning. And I can still remember hearing the gate slam behind me. And I looked out, and it was so strange because it was like the world was just brighter all of a sudden. It was so crazy.
You're walking out of prison, literally.
Yes. And just on a whim, and so I went home then I kind of thought, oh gosh, I live here. So in 30 days, I'm going to have to leave. But I felt relief. I didn't feel panic. I wasn't worried. I wasn't stressed. It was the right thing. And later on that evening, my coworker came over, the guy that I told you we had been really working together to hustle those 16-hour days. And I opened the door, and he looked at me, kind of wanted to know what was going on, because when he went into work, I wasn't there. And he said, oh my God, you look 10 years younger. I was only 28. Okay.
And it was like only a couple hours later, not even a long time.
Yes. And he was like, what happened? And so I was telling him, and he just kept looking at me. He was like, you can't even understand how you look. He was like, you look like the weight of the world has been lifted off your shoulders, and you look 10 years younger. And I remember saying, oh my gosh, I'm only 28. How old is I? But I just knew that was it. And what was so funny was my old warden, the one who is now regional director and who I really, admired and appreciated everything he'd ever done for me. He'd call me a week or so later, and he was like, well, what happened? And, I was telling him. He said, yeah, that he had talked to my, warden at the time. He said, oh yeah. He's like, oh, she'll come back. She'll come back. She's just mad. And I was just like, no, I'm not. I'm 28 years old. I do not need this job. And I just knew that was it. And it was so liberating, because I really felt like that I was, up until that day, that I was locked in, because I had gone to school for criminal justice, and because I had now spent 10 years in this career, I was locked in, and I wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
And I look back, and I talk about this all the time. What if I would have stayed? What would my life be like now? How miserable, I would be. And I'd definitely be the world's,
you'd look.
yes, I'd be the world's biggest alcoholic, I'm sure. Because I definitely drank to de-stress, and it was just amazing. And looking back, it was so easy. But whenever I do tell people, they're just like, wow, I can't believe you did that. And I think the fact that I lived on the unit compounded it, because now I was unemployed and had to find a place to live, which was crazy. Right. But so the craziest part was I actually bought my first house before I was actually unemployed.
Okay.
So what is kind of neat in the state of Texas, once you turn in your, separation agreement, you still have to burn your time. You've accrued all this, comp time and holiday time when you work holidays. So I actually had about 2 months worth of time, and I was able to go out. I was still employed. You're actually still on their books, and you're still receiving a paycheck. Go out and find and buy a house within 4 weeks.
Wow.
Signed, closed, moved before I actually was separated from my employment. So it actually, worked out better than I ever could have imagined, because I'd always dreamed of owning my own house, but just hadn't. So it was really neat.
That is super cool. I was going to say, even if you were just renting, I feel like it would be really difficult to find somewhere that would let you sign agreements when you don't have guaranteed income coming in. But that little loophole sounds like it worked really well for you.
It did. And I was like, 4 weeks, I've got 4 weeks and it was a crazy time. It was 2008. And so if you'll remember, it's when the Great Recession. Okay. So that's another part that I failed to mention. I quit at the height of the Great Recession. Yeah. To put some timing on it. It was actually, I separated from the state July 31st, 2008.
Okay.
Which is
And
when
no pressure, but you now have a mortgage.
yeah. And so, the real estate market the bubble is busting, but I lived a little south of Houston, Texas. Well, the bubble didn't bust there until about 2 years later. So
Okay.
I was trying to buy at the height of the bubble when it was all falling down around us. But it's so crazy because I'm one of those people, very logical, and I think things through. I'm a future planner. I try to plan. But sometimes the best things, I don't want anybody to really go out there and do anything too crazy today, but sometimes the best things are just soul guided, or you follow your heart and everything really does fall into place, because that was the absolute worst time in the history of the modern U.S. economy for me to quit my job and try to buy a house.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I did it and it worked out.
Yeah. So obviously you said that was, or we're close. Is that 20 years ago? No, 10. That was 10 years. 20. Yeah.
10.
20.
Oh God. Yeah. Okay. I was like, wait a minute. Am I 78? No. Yeah.
Yes,
So 10.
okay.
So it was
10 years ago.
July 2018. Yeah.
Yes. I was a math teacher for a few years, and that was not very impressive to me. But so in the last 10 years, then what have you been doing aside from at least some of that time enjoying your house?
Yeah. Well, I actually don't live there anymore. So I did. Okay. So, and this was probably not very financially savvy of me, but I actually withdrew a cash sum, my retirement from the state of Texas, but I was only 28.
Right.
If somebody's over 30, I really wouldn't recommend that. And it was a sizable sum. So I was able to live on that for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I put it in a savings account, and I just had it roll over every month and like pay me the paycheck that I was used to. I got fat and I gained like 20 pounds that year. I was decompressing for a year.
Mm-hmm.
I was going out to eat. I was enjoying my friends, probably drinking a little bit too much. That's a whole other topic.
For a different reason than you were when
Yes.
you were working.
And one day I kind of thought, I'm going to need to find a job. My money's running out. You've been doing this for a year. So I was looking online, and I was actually kind of thinking, I could maybe teach at the local community college, criminal justice, but they had an ad for this new thing called alternative teacher certification here in Texas. And it was like, you have a 4-year degree, you too can be a teacher. So I was like, hey, okay, I ran a prison, I can run a classroom. So yeah.
I was a middle school teacher, like I said, and that sounds like actually good experience.
Well, I was a middle school teacher, and now I'm a high school principal. So it definitely transfers over. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. So I did that, and I was subbing while I was doing this program, really just to, meet people in the district, get my name out there. And one of the schools I was subbing at asked me to be a long-term sub. They had one job come open at the end of that year. So now it's 2009, one job. And it was 7th grade science. And I told that principal, I said, this is my job. He was like, well, we don't put your name in the hat. 200 people applied for that job.
Wow.
And he was like, this is crazy. And it was the recession. But I was fortunate enough to get the job and was so happy. So now I was gainfully employed again. As a teacher for 3 years. I got my master's and then my doctorate in education. Became an assistant principal 3 years after starting teaching. And then 3 years later, I got a head principal job and actually moved back home here, Bryan College Station, Texas. And that was 4 years ago. So here I am, and I'm really ready to make another bold move at the end of this school year. But this may be a little more planned out, but still a little following your heart.
Are you able to say what it is?
Yes. So I have, over the past about year and a half, just had my own personal, really life-changing experiences with coaching. I started with a wonderful, wonderful relationship coach, and totally changed my relationship with myself, my romantic relationships, and just the way I view myself in relationships. And it just kind of led me into, I joined an executive coach group and a business coach that just kept going on and on. And now I'm a certified empowerment coach. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. He was so quiet earlier. And have been coaching women who really suffer from imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking about strictly entrepreneurs. This was something that I struggled with. And really looking back, I struggled with it as a young age, especially being promoted in TDC. It was a man's world. It was an older man's world. And I was a very, very young female. I struggled with that. Even here recently, when I completed my doctorate degree, I really struggled with feeling as if mine was equal to everyone else's. And then I read up on imposter syndrome and I was like, oh my gosh, other people have felt this way, because I felt like my degree was fake. I mean, it's not. It's from a major state university here in Texas. It's definitely not fake. But yeah, so becoming certified and starting my own coaching business and working with women like myself who are high achieving. They typically have masters and, possibly law degrees or doctorate degrees, and appear very successful and are very successful, but they don't feel like they're in control of their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
They don't feel like they're making the decisions day to day. And sometimes they're not, but it's because they haven't fully stepped into their power. And this is just something that it's a huge shift from what I've been doing and working in public schools. But I really feel like I'm stepping into my own doing this and being able to share my experiences with women and hope that they don't have to take this long journey like I did. So that's what I'm looking forward to doing. And I'm looking forward to exiting the public education arena at the end of this school year. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, I guess we'll see if it feels the same way as walking out of prison.
Yeah, I think now being a tad bit older, I'm maybe a little more nervous. When you're 28, you're a little more carefree than when you're almost 40. So
sure.
I have that same feeling though of, when you found what you wanted, and there's really no going back from that once you've identified what it is that you do want and the life that you want.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love that. I think that's such a good mission. It's funny because my main source of income is as a makeup artist freelance. And a few years back, I was doing Anne Fullenwilder's makeup, and she's the editor-in-chief of Marie Claire magazine. And I've done makeup on plenty of celebrities and do things all the time, but because she was the editor-in-chief of a beauty magazine, I was like, oh my gosh, like she's going to look at every product in my kit and judge me, and it's going to be like, I'm so nervous about this. And I was like, should I tell my husband, or I said to my husband, should I tell her that I'm nervous? And he was like, no, of course not. And of course I get there and I'm almost done with her makeup, so she knows I know what I'm doing and everything. And I was just like, do you ever feel like you don't belong? And she was, I think, one of the first people who told me about imposter syndrome. And she was like, every single day, she said, every single day I feel that way. And you just have to choose to be confident or remind yourself that and I was like, yeah, I was hired by my agent for the job, and they saw my work, and they obviously picked me for a reason to do it, but it was still just so terrifying. And she was like, oh yeah, and in our beauty closet. I'm like, I need a beauty closet. But like, even someone in such a high up position as that says every day she feels that way. So you're definitely needed. There's a place for you in the world for helping women, even like her, to like you said, step into their power.
And I definitely think, hey, that's a really neat story. And that's a really neat job too, makeup artist. I bet you are amazing at it. I think it's so unique to women because we tend to need permission from someone to feel that we're qualified, or we should be an editor-in-chief or a great professional makeup artist, or like myself, a PhD. And men don't need that, and I've noticed that they show up. A lot of times they think they have a little more talent and skill than they do, and that's okay. But we tend to need this validation and this permission, and someone else recognizing us as whatever it is we want to be. And I really want to change that. And something I've noticed, the way you present yourself is typically the way someone is going to accept you. So when you presented yourself as a professional makeup artist who is experienced and knew what she was doing, she accepted you as that. There was no questioning it. We're the ones questioning ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I hope I don't alienate too many listeners by bringing up this meme that was posted in good fun and that I got a good chuckle at, but it said like, tackle your day with the confidence of a mediocre white man today or something. And I just cracked up because I mean, of course there are amazing white men that are humble and great at what they do, but I think just about everyone can think of someone who's a little bit bigger headed maybe than he should be that and fits that.
Just not that. They just don't require that permission, that we need, or the validation, and may not even need or want it. It's not even so much a question
Not
about
on their
being
radar.
about being arrogant or thinking that they're more competent they are. It's just not looking for it. And I definitely think that is something unique to women. And if we could adopt that attitude, maybe it would be a better place. But I do think at the same time, it is good for us to constantly, us as women, we're looking for ways to improve. And, I don't want to say judging ourselves, not the word I'm looking for, assessing our competency in certain areas. And I think that anytime you work with a woman or you hire a woman, she's going to give 110%.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I have to ask, going back to your past life in the prison system, I've seen Orange is the New Black. How does TV compare to reality in those regards? I know you were in a men's facility and not women, so I'm sure that makes a big difference, but
that's totally, it is so totally, it's theater. That is theater. Now I will tell you, and I've had some exposure to some women inmates. One of the facilities I worked on was a transfer facility, and they had a wing where women would come and stay the night on their way to another facility. So there is an element of relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but mother-daughter relationships, prison, pseudo mother-daughter relationships. There's definitely an element of that. There's definitely an element of hierarchy. There is the black market in prison. There is definitely ethnic grouping, just happens naturally. But yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Orange is the New Black. I was actually Alex Voss for this last Halloween because people kept telling me I needed to be her. My hair was about 6 inches longer at the time. And I'm trying to think if there is a show that truly reflects the life inside Texas Penitentiary, but I don't think there is unless it's a documentary. It is hard. It is tough. It is a very violent and oppressive environment. And I do hear often, and you want to talk about memes, and I see these a lot. People say things like, 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, whatever, or they're kind of glorifying prison. And saying, well, why don't we give another group of people this? Well, they're two separate issues. I'm all for taking care of the groups that they're referring to. It's typically the elderly. Prison, especially in Texas, is not a place to be glorified. It is a place where, just due to the nature of it, both staff and inmates are in danger all day, every day. And heat, there's no air conditioner in Texas prisons. Yeah. So,
I've been to Texas a couple times, and that sounds like a nightmare, even on its own.
And it's a humid heat. One time years ago, I was up on what's called 4-row. It's tiers, and we had a thermometer up there, and it was about 125 degrees. And so I was wearing work boots, pants, a T-shirt, and then a long sleeve shirt over that, and was like doing physical labor.
And probably a hat too, or did you get to not wear a hat?
I mean, women, you could wear caps, but I just wore my hair in a bun. I'm not like a cap person, but extremely, it's not a place to be glorified. Let me put it that way. But yeah, the prison shows, I definitely love Orange is the New Black. I used to watch Oz. I don't know if you watched Oz years ago. It's theater for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I don't know if your answer will be something related to that experience or more related to one of the bold moves you've told us about, or something completely different that you might be open to sharing, but I'm curious about the scariest thing you've ever been through.
I'm trying to think. So, and maybe because we just had, we've been talking about this, definitely one of the scariest events that comes to mind was an event when I was working in TDC, when we had a pretty large scale riot pop off pretty spontaneously, and scary because I'm a very linear thinker, and I played it out in my head, and in the ending I had was not good. So I was at the area kind of called the lower desk, and it's really in the main hallway. It's in front of the doors to the chow hall. And we had an officer at the time who, very dependable, good guy, but he had a tendency to, and I'm going to use some slang here, we called it wire up the inmates. But what it meant was he wasn't the kind of person who was good at, calming people down or verbal de-escalation. He tended to escalate things verbally. So he was calling for me to come in there, and he was kind of getting into an argument with an offender, and he pulls out it's called COP. It's your carry-on person, like tear gas. It's mace. That in and of itself is just not a good move. But I was telling him and the inmate to come out of the chow hall because I'm looking up and there's 400 pairs of eyes looking at us. These are the other inmates in the chow hall. And I'm like, I know we need to get separated so we can just kind of work out the problem and go on about our day. Well, we're coming out, and something happens, and I don't even really remember. We were almost out the door, and I think another inmate got mad and started running towards us, and he's pulling his gas out on him, and all of a sudden the whole chow hall was running towards us, and it just kind of popped off immediately.
Wow.
Fists started flying, officers and inmates started fighting. And I remember jumping like over somebody and running to the intercom system, because in my head, we lost that unit. It was fixing to happen. We were hugely outnumbered, and they were spilling out of the chow hall. And I just thought, we're fixing to lose this entire unit. And I hit the intercom mic, and I was, saying, riot in the chow hall, all staff respond. And I said it on the radio as well to the radio tower so they could radio everybody. And I remember, I know they were confused because they were like, repeat. Did you say riot and I'm like, yes, riot in the chow hall. And I ran to the control center and got, it appears to be a sawed-off shotgun, but it actually shoots gas. And I remember running back into the chow hall and, telling the inmates to get down. And one of them was like, she's got a shotgun, but it really wasn't. But I'm glad they thought it was. And we ended up, getting the doors shut and getting all the offenders who were actively fighting staff in handcuffs. So it was a bloody situation. I mean, by this time, there was blood everywhere. Gas had been sprayed. I'm slinging around this thing that looks like a shotgun. So it worked out okay. We got it contained. But in a split second, it went from being a calm Sunday, I'll never forget, it was a Sunday, to a riot. It was spontaneous, and I'd heard these horror stories, and I just thought they're gonna take control of the unit. We're gonna be taken hostage. It's gonna happen this quickly. So I was pretty shook up later, and I remember, even thinking that night, like this could have really, really been bad. It still wasn't good, but it could have really, really been bad.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned, my middle school teacher background, I've been in the middle of fights in a crowded hallway. And I think some bar fights when I've been out, and that alone is scary. I can't imagine being in a room full of criminals who are all bigger than me. Like there are a lot of middle schoolers that were bigger than me, but I can't imagine being in a chaotic prison riot. So that definitely sounds terrifying for sure.
It was.
I'm glad that you're safe. I generally follow up my question about the scariest things people have experienced with how they push past fear. In that case, it sounds like you didn't really have a choice. And it doesn't sound like, and maybe having experienced that is part of why walking out of the doors of the prison didn't feel that scary. But I'm sure since most people who make bold moves don't make just one, and you're working on a new one coming up. So maybe this is advice you can give yourself or the advice that you give your clients. But how do you push past fear when you have something scary you need to deal with?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I was kind of thinking about it earlier as I was getting ready to come on, kind of the things we would talk about. And I think the main thing that I want people to walk away from after hearing our interview is that you're not stuck on this path. And I do think it's also something that's unique to us women. We think because we've gone to school for this certain thing, or we've been working here for so many years, or we're in this certain relationship, just because we started down this path does not mean we have to continue down it. It doesn't mean we can't get off or start a new path. It's just your story is ever evolving, and it's ever unfolding. And to me, I want to even kind of shift it from getting over fear to just one of accepting and realizing, you're not stuck in this job or in this line of work or in this relationship. Every day is literally a chance to write a new story, or to write a new chapter, or to turn the page, or whatever allegory works for you. And I know it sounds so cliche, but having lived it and looking back and seen it in action, and there are really, with very few exceptions, I think, no wrong choices in your life, because none of them are permanent. None of them are static. And they all lead to so many things that you probably haven't even thought of, or that don't even exist yet.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I feel like so many phrases that are cliche, like it's because people say them all the time, and people say them all the time because it's true. So I think that that's a great message. Do you have anything else that you would like to leave the audience with? Maybe lessons you've learned recently, or that you wish you had learned sooner, or anything else like that?
I think when I look back over the last year, especially the last few months, the lessons that I've learned, and I mentioned this, was to allow things to unfold. Women, in particularly women who are type A, or like myself, very controlling. We want to control every situation. We want to control the outcome. We want to control other people. I want to know in 6 months where I'll be, in a year where I'll be. And what's the fun in that? Where's the magic in that? And that is a lot of energy for something you really can't control. I have really started just allowing things to unfold, but understanding when what's unfolding is not in alignment with my true self. And when it's not, it's time for me to walk away. And I had an inner struggle earlier this year about staying in my current job, staying in public education. I just kept going back and forth. When I finally asked myself, is this aligned with what I want for my life every day? No, it's not. And I have to allow that to unfold, instead of trying to put myself in this box of, well, I have a doctorate, and I'm a principal, and I have a superintendent certification, and this is what I planned on doing. It is no longer in alignment with what I want for my life, and I have to allow that to unfold.
I love that. I meant to ask, are you coaching on the side right now of what you're doing? Okay, gotcha. Perfect. So then if people are listening and want to perhaps make the transition a little easier for you by having more existing clients as you walk out the doors at the end of this school year, where can they find you online?
You can find me anywhere at Kenzie A. Bond. So Kenz as in zebra, A Bond, like James Bond. Kenzie A. Bond. That's my Instagram handle, Facebook, website, you name it. I am Kenzie A. Bond.
Perfect. That should be pretty easy, but I'll put that in the show notes. Another thing I want to put in the show notes, you've been great with recommendations so far. So I'm wondering if you have any books you'd like to recommend.
I have two great authors that I want to recommend. And the first one, and so here's the funny thing about the first book I want to recommend. I actually really put off reading it because I thought that it didn't apply to me. and that's Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic,
Okay.
Creative Living Beyond Fear. Have you read that one?
I have not, but I have had it recommended a few times.
Okay. And I wouldn't read it because I was like, I'm not creative. I'm not an artist. It is an amazing book, much like Eat, Pray, Love. It's not the same story. It's not the same
Right.
type of book, but really bringing things to light. And she really impresses upon you that when you have an idea or when you have creativity or magic, you have to seize it. You have to act upon it, because if you don't, it goes away and it goes somewhere else. It's an amazing book. And then 2 books by Cheryl Strayed. The first one, Wild. I am a big hiker, camper, outdoors woman, I guess you would say. And she actually hiked the Pacific Crest Trail on the West Coast. It was an amazing story. But then, and this is kind of a little known fact about her, she was a columnist, an advice columnist under the pen name Dear Sugar. And so she compiled some of her best advice columns into a book called Tiny Beautiful Things, Advice on Love and Life from Dear Sugar. And it is a very good read. It's funny. It's very blunt and to the point, but she will make you look at things in a way that maybe you haven't before. So those are 3 books that I highly recommend.
Very cool. Thank you for those suggestions. And I didn't know that about her. So that is an interesting fact. I like it. You spoke a little bit about your alignment to your true self and how making sure what you're doing is following along those lines. So maybe this will be an easy question for you to answer because you seem kind of in touch with that. But I'm curious if you know your purpose, and if so, if you wouldn't mind sharing it with us. I
have, throughout my entire life, felt that my purpose is to, in one way or another, improve life here on earth. I've done a lot of work with animals. I've done a lot of work with my socioeconomically disadvantaged students. But I think no matter what line of work I'm in or what avenue I'm doing, I have to improve life here on earth. And it's typically done through improving the lives of people on earth. And if I can empower one woman to take that chance and start that company or leave that relationship or take that trip or whatever it may be, it has an exponential effect on the earth and the universe. Yeah. And that's all that I can ask. And it does it. It takes different forms. You know, when I started working for TDC, I wanted every day to increase the public safety and, you know, create a humane environment inside prisons. When I moved to education, I wanted to give kids a chance to not end up in prison. Sure. And now it's just converting it into another form.
I love that. And I always find it so fascinating when people answer that question, because it can be like people take it either very narrow or very broad. And the question becomes a lot easier, I think, if you are open to different ways of answering it, like more broadly, or something that's dynamic where, well, my purpose for these years is this or was this, and because it can definitely develop over time or change. So thank you for sharing that. All right, my last question for you, I think is going to be an interesting answer, especially given your past. So if 8-year-old Kenzie had a crystal ball and you could look in it and see where you are and where you've been up till now, and then of course, you know, you have your plan, your exit strategy for leaving the school where you're the principal, and you may have trips or other things planned in the future between now and then, or after then, the foreseeable future, I guess. On a scale of 1 to 11, how excited would little Kenzie be to see the woman that you are today?
Oh, I'd say a 15 for sure. I mean, definitely. And don't get me wrong, there were some dark years, you know, that we didn't talk about today, and that's fine. There were some really tough years, but just, I get excited when I think about who I've turned into over the last 3 or 4 years. So absolutely. And I actually tell a lot of my kids at school this when they're struggling with things. And I'm like, guys, y'all have no idea who you're going to be, you know? And if I typically think about my 16-year-old self, I'm like, if I knew then where I'm going to be now, I wouldn't worry about any of that stuff. But no, it's actually was telling my mother about a year ago. I said, you know what, Mama, I'm finally the person I always wanted to be.
Oh, that's
I
beautiful.
finally feel like that person.
I love that. Well, Kenzie, thank you so much for taking time at the end of a busy week. I know how I felt on Fridays when I was teaching and in a school system, so I applaud you for having the energy to chat with me. And I appreciate what you're doing in the world, too, to make life a better place on earth. I think you are living in your purpose, it seems like to me, and I appreciate the efforts you're making.
Thank you. No, this was really good. This is the first night I didn't have a game or anything to go to on Friday night. So this worked out perfectly.
Awesome. Fabulous.
I hope you loved episode number 247 of the Bold Moves podcast. Please stay tuned for a great challenge from Kenzie coming this Friday. I would love it if you shared this to get to as many people as possible. If you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And if you would please leave me a rating in iTunes, I would really appreciate that as well. Thank you so much. As always, be bold and have a sparkly day. Bye-bye.